Recently, I was cataloguing the manuscripts in the library of a Cambridge college. I reached the end of the numbered volumes on the shelves, and I asked the librarian whether there were any more papers which he thought I ought to include in my description. There was a tin box which was pulled out and dusted. Its label was faded, and on it was inscribed, "Papers of the Venerable Archdeacon Haynes, bequeathed in 1834 by his sister, Miss Letitia Haynes." I knew the name at once. I'd read his obituary in the Gentleman's Magazine years before. Archdeacon Haynes, who came to a very odd end at Barchester. Dr. Haynes, already a mature man. Thank you. Moved to Barchester with his sister in the year 1810. The office of Archdeacon had long been the object of his wishes, but his predecessor, Pulteney, refused to depart until he had attained the age of 92. About a week after the celebrations of that 92nd birthday, Dr. Haynes hurried cheerfully into his breakfast room, rubbing his hands, humming a tune. He was greeted by the sight of his sister seated in her usual place behind the tea urn, but bowed forward and sobbing unrestrainedly into her handkerchief. What is the matter? What bad news? He began. "Oh, Johnny, you haven't heard. The poor dear Archdeacon." "The Archdeacon? Yes. Well, what is it? Ill, is he?" "Oh, no. They found him on the staircase this morning. It is so shocking." "It's possible? Dear. Poor Pulteney. Did he have a seizure?" "They don't think so," said Miss Haynes. "That is almost the worst thing about it. It seems to have been all the fault of that stupid maid of theirs, Jane." Dr. Haynes paused. "I don't quite understand, Letitia. How was the maid at fault?" "As far as I can make out," Miss Haynes said, "there was a stair rod missing, and she never mentioned it. And the poor Archdeacon Pulteney set his foot quite on the edge of the step. You know how slippery that oak is. And, it seems he must have fallen almost the whole flight, broken his neck." After standing in silence before the window for some minutes, Dr. Haynes left the room and did not appear again that morning. I need only add that the careless maidservant was dismissed forthwith, but that the missing stair rod was very shortly afterwards found under the stair carpet. Additional proof, if any were needed, of extreme stupidity and carelessness on her part. For a good many years, Dr. Haynes had been marked out by his ability, which seems to have been really considerable, as the likely successor of Archdeacon Pulteney, and he wasn't to be disappointed. He was duly installed and zealously gave himself over to the responsibilities of his new position. Functions, as he discovered, sadly neglected by the late Archdeacon Pulteney. Look in Haynes' journals. He lists what Archdeacon Pulteney has failed to do. Dues uncollected for 12 years, no visits for 7 years, 4 churches in disrepair, his deputies nearly as incapable as himself. In his correspondence, Haynes calculates that a period of 3 years will just suffice to set the business of the archdeaconry upon a proper footing. And so it proved. Now he begins to take an interest in the fabric, the furniture, as in music. There is a draft of a letter to Sylvanus Urban, which I don't think was ever sent, describing the stalls in the choir. The prayer desk at the east end is carved with 3 small but remarkable statuettes in the grotesque manner. One is an exquisitely modelled figure of a cat. Opposite to this stands a shape muffled in a long mantle. This might at first sight be mistaken for a monk or friar of orders grey, for the head is cowled and a knotted cord hangs down from somewhere about the waist. A slight inspection, however, will lead to a very different conclusion. The knotted cord is quickly seen to be a halter, held by a hand all but concealed within the draperies, while the sunken features, and horrid to relate, the rent flesh upon the cheekbones, proclaim the king of terrors. These figures are evidently the production of no unskilled chisel. Some late researches among the chapter accounts have shown me that the carving of the stalls was not, as was very usually reported, the work of Dutch artists, but was executed by a native of this city or district named Austin. The timber was procured from an oak copse in the vicinity, the property of the dean and chapter, known as Holy Wood. Upon a recent visit to the parish, Haynes writes, "I learned from an aged and respectable local some of the history of the oaks employed to furnish the cathedral with its stalls. One tree in particular, which stood near the center of the grove, it is remembered that it was known as the Hanging Oak." A quantity of human bones was found in the soil. To return to his career, as it is to be gathered from his diaries, those of his first 3 years of hard and careful work show him throughout in high spirits, and doubtless during this time that reputation for hospitality and urbanity, which is mentioned in his obituary notice, was well deserved. After that, as time goes on, I see a shadow coming over him, destined to develop into utter blackness, which I can only think must have been reflected in his outward demeanor. He commits a good deal of his fears and troubles to his diary. There was no other outlet for them. He was unmarried, and his sister was not always with him. But I am much mistaken if he has told all that he might have told. I shall give you, gentlemen, some extracts. August 30th, 1816. The days begin to draw in more perceptibly than ever. Now that the archdeaconry papers are reduced to order, I must find some further employment for the evenings, hours of autumn and winter. It is a great blow that Letitia's health will not allow her to stay through these months. Why not go on with my defense of episcopacy? It may be useful. September the 15th. Letitia has left me for Brighton. October the 11th, 1816. Candles lit in the choir for the first time at evening prayers. It came as a shock. I find that I absolutely shrink from the dark season. November 17th, 1816. During the Magnificat, I was, I regret to say, almost overcome with sleep. My hand was resting on the back of the carved figure of a cat, which is the nearest to me of the 3 figures at the end of my stall. I was not aware of this, for I was not looking in that direction until I was startled by what seemed a softness, a feeling of rather rough and coarse fur, and sudden movement as if the creature were twisting round its head to bite me. The impression of the unpleasant feeling was so strong that I found myself rubbing my hand upon my surplice. December 6th, 1816. I do indeed miss Letitia's company. The evenings after I've worked as long as I can at my defense of episcopacy are very trying. This house is too large for a lonely man. Visitors of any kind are too rare. I get an uncomfortable impression when going to my room that there is company of some kind. The fact is, I may as well formulate it to myself that I hear voices. This, I am well aware, is a common symptom of incipient decay of the brain. Work, diligent work, and a punctual attention to the duties which fall to me is my best remedy, and I have little doubt that it will prove efficacious. January 15th, 1817. I had occasion to come downstairs last night to my workroom for my watch, which I had inadvertently left on my table when I went up to bed. I think I was at the top of the last flight when I had sudden impression of a sharp whisper in my ear. Take care. I clutched the balusters and naturally looked round at once. Of course, there was nothing. After a moment, I went on. There was no good turning back, but I had, as nearly as possible, fallen. A cat, a large one by the feel of it, slipped between my feet. But again, of course, I saw nothing. It may have been the kitchen cat, but I do not think it was. Now, I digress to mention a document which, rightly or wrongly, I believe to have a bearing on the thread of my story. The account books of Dr. Haynes show, from a date but little later than that of his institution as Archdeacon, a quarterly payment of £25 to J.L. Nothing could have been made of this had it stood by itself. But I connect with it a very soiled and ill-written letter which was in a pocket in the cover of a diary. There's no date or postmark, and deciphering is difficult. It appears to run, "Dear Sir, I've been expecting to hear of you these last weeks, and not having done so, must suppose you have not got mine, which was saying how me and my man had met in with bad times this season. All seems to go cross with us on the farm, and which way to look for the rent we have no knowledge of it. This been the sad case with us, if you would have the great liberality, probably, but the exact spelling defies reproduction, to send £40. Otherwise steps will have to be took which I should not wish. As you was the means of me losing my place with Dr. Pulteney, I think it is only just what I am asking. And you know best what I could say if I was put to it. Your obedient servant, Jane Lee." About the time at which I suppose this letter to have been written, there is in fact a payment of £40 to J.L. We return to the diary. October 22nd, 1817. At evening prayers during the Psalms, I had that same experience which I recollect from last year. I was resting my hand on one of Austin's carved figures, as before, I usually avoid that of the cat now. And I was going to have said a change came over it, but that seems to be making too much of what was a physical upset in myself. At any rate, the wood seemed to become chilly and soft, as if made of wet linen. The whispering in my house was more persistent tonight. I seemed not to be rid of it in my room. A nervous man, which I am not, and hope I am not becoming, would have been very annoyed, if not alarmed, by it. The cat was on the stairs tonight. I think it sits there always. There is no kitchen cat. November 15th, 1817. Here again I must note down a matter I do not understand. I have been much troubled in my sleep. No definite image presented itself, but I was pursued by the vivid impression that wet lips were whispering into my ear, very rapidly, over and over. After this, I suppose I fell asleep, but I was awakened with a start by a feeling as if a hand were laid on my shoulder. To my intense alarm, I found myself standing at the top of the lowest flight of the first staircase. The moon was shining brightly enough through the large window to let me see that there was a large cat upon the second or third step. I can make no comment. I crept up to bed again. I do not know how. Yes, mine is a heavy burden. Then follows a line or two which has been scratched out. I fancy I read something like, acted for the best. Not long after this, it's evident to me that the Archdeacon's firmness began to give way under the pressure of these phenomena. I omit, they are too painful, all the lamentations and beseeching and praying. Throughout this time, he is obstinate in clinging to his post. He tried to distract himself, inviting visitors to his house. January 7th, 1818. I've prevailed on my cousin Alan to give me a few days, and he's to occupy the chamber next to mine. A still night. Alan slept well, but complained of the noise of the wind. My own experiences were as before, still, whispering and whispering. What is it that he wants to say? January 9th. Alan thinks this is a very noisy house. He thinks, too, that my cat is an unusually large and fine specimen, but very wild. January 10th, 1818. Alan and I in the library until 11. He left me twice to see what the maids were doing in the hall. Returning the second time, he told me that he'd seen one of them going through the door at the end of the passage, and said if his wife were here, she would soon get them into better order. I asked him what coloured dress the maid wore. He said grey or white. I supposed it would be so. January 11th, 1818. Alan left me today. January 15th. I must be firm. January 20th. I must be firm. 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 These words, I must be firm, occur again and again on subsequent days. Sometimes they're the only entry. They are in an unusually large hand. I must be firm. And dug into the paper in a way which must have broken the pen that wrote them. Apparently, the Archdeacon's friends did not remark any change in his behavior, and this gives me a high idea of his courage and determination. The diary tells us nothing more than I have indicated of the last days of his life. The end of it all must be told in the polished language of the obituary notice. The morning of the 26th of February was cold and tempestuous. At an early hour, the servants had occasion to go into the front hall of the residence occupied by the lamented subject of these lines. What was their horror upon observing the form of their beloved and respected master lying upon the landing of the principal staircase in an attitude which inspired the gravest fears. The vertebral column was fractured in more than one place. This might have been the result of a fall. It appeared that the stair carpet was loosened at one point. But in addition to this, there were injuries inflicted upon the eyes, nose, and mouth, as if by the agency of some savage animal, which, dreadful to relate, rendered those features unrecognizable. The vital spark was, it is needless to add, completely extinct. I had already formed the conclusion that Dr. Haynes was responsible for the death of Dr. Pulteney. Haynes' ambition, the missing stair rod, the maid's dismissal, her demand for money, all point to his guilty hand. But the incident connected with the carved figure of death upon the Archdeacon's stall was a very perplexing feature. My conjecture was that it had been cut out of the wood of the hanging oak. That might have been obvious enough, but also impossible to substantiate. However, I paid a visit to Barchester, partly with the view of finding out whether there were any relics of the woodwork to be heard of. I was introduced by one of the canons to the curator of the local museum. I told this gentleman of the description of certain carved figures and arms formerly on the stalls, and asked whether any had survived. He was able to show me the arms of Dean West and some other fragments. These, he said, had been got from an old resident who had once owned a figure, perhaps one of those which I was inquiring for. There was a very odd thing about that figure, he said. The old man who had it told him that he picked it up in a wood yard where he'd obtained the other pieces and had taken it home for his children. On the way home he was fiddling about with it, and it came in two in his hands, and a bit of paper dropped out. This he picked up and mounted on a card. The paper was quite legibly inscribed in old-fashioned script, and this is what was on it. When I grew in the wood, I was watered with blood. Now in the church I stand. Whoso touches me with his hand, if a bloody hand he bear, I counsel him to beware, lest he be fetched away either by night or day, but chiefly when the wind blows high on a night in February. This I dreamt, the 25th of February, Anno Domini 1699. John Austin. Oh, I suppose it's a charm or a spell, something of that sort, said the curator. Yes, I said, I suppose one might. What became of the figure that was hidden inside? Oh, I forgot, said he. The old man told me it was so ugly and frightened his children so much that he burnt it.